how did the wave affect the students afterwards?
That's what this film answers. Lesson plan it was produced by the students in the class, and they went around and found each other and talked about it. And one of the oddities is that all the students had memorabilia of the event. Can you imagine your students 40 years from now having memorabilia of a lesson that you taught?
No.
They have their membership cards.
Wow.
Yeah,
Amazing.
or the banners. It was stunning.
And were you there? Were you part of that?
I helped
film?
them, yeah. I'm lucky. I live in San Francisco. Many of the students have their families in Palo Alto, which is about the distance between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
Right.
It's south of San Francisco.
California.
So the students are visiting constantly, and I get access to where they are today and
what they're doing.
You know, we spend considerable time together, as we did in making this film. We went to Sundance together. Some of them came to Germany with me during a preview of the German film.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm lucky.
And how did it affect you?
Well, in one respect, it's like a Russian nesting doll. It's something that constantly just reappears, but it reappears in different manifestations. So I get to, I don't know if it's a privilege, but I get to rethink it and try to understand it from a distance of time or through the eyes of students in Barcelona doing a play or in South Africa. It's international. Students in Russia doing this story. So it's a constant replaying of it to some extent, but I see it done differently and attacking different issues. So it's valuable in that respect. In terms of affecting me personally, it's fascinating. It's like you've written a country western song, and you're asked to sing that song over and over again. But in fact, your life has moved through many different eras and times, and those stories are just as intriguing to you or valuable to you, and yet this one story becomes prominent. But meaning, Kay Cazelli, it's just as intriguing to me as The Wave. Or I write a lot about my grandchildren. I write a lot about everyday events.
Right. I didn't realize you were so prolific, actually, until I looked. Well, you are. Over 25 books and 10 plays.
And my wife and I took in 2 children. Well, that's another story, but we ended up taking in 2 children that were homeless or beat up and abused and would be going to jail. And we raised them. And so they're an intricate part of our family. So,
and growing up, did you also have foster brothers and sisters?
That's true. My mother, being Jewish, I don't know if this is a Jewish trait, but always welcomed people into our home. And we had a family living with us my entire childhood and into adulthood, and they're part of my family. My grandparents did the same thing. They took in people that lived in their home for a lifetime. So, and then I did that, strangely enough. And then I realized my daughter's now doing it. So I don't know if it's a Jewish trait.
It's become a tradition, right?
But it's marked our family, yeah. And it's a blessing.
It is a blessing. You wrote someplace that your grandmother influenced you so much in terms of the stories she used to tell you at the table.
So true, and I almost didn't realize it until being here in Jerusalem. So suddenly we're being exposed to history, King David, and all those stories. And I realized my grandmother was telling me those stories, and I had assumed them, but I didn't place them, and now I'm living in them, which is fascinating, actually.
Do you have some advice, or do you have some insight that you feel that a teacher can bring to the classroom where, do we have to sacrifice community and action and discipline in order to raise students and teach students who are thinkers?
That's a great question. Tonight I'm going to be speaking to educators, so it's the first time I'm actually answering that kind of question versus just talking about the wave.
Right.
So my wife said, because I don't consider myself to be an academician, or I've spent a lot of time thinking about that question, but I do have lived a life as a classroom teacher, being fired from public schools, but finding myself therefore in hospitals or the Recreation Center for the Handicapped for 30 years, working with physically and mentally disabled. So tonight I'm going to talk about, one thing is the learners are all different, so how do you embrace the differences to allow a child that's academically acute with language versus a child that might be talented with art or practical things. You want to have that inclusiveness and recognize that you have to teach to those different talents or provide access for that child to be successful. The other thing I was thinking of, the disciplines have to mix up. So if you're teaching history, you might well find a teacher that's teaching English and find a bond there, because the English teacher is talking about Steinbeck and you're talking about California history. And these worlds need to be together, because one is literally explaining what's happening historically. And you get a bigger sense. This is all from, my wife asked me to do this morning, so I did.
So integrating the disciplines.
Absolutely. So you find another teacher that's on the same theme, or a music teacher, and you find some common ground and let the, work together.
Right.
The other thing is honoring everyday heroes as a teacher, to bring into your classroom those people around you that excel in something or are blessed by something or just good at something. So the students get an idea there's many paths to life and success. So it might be an activist, or it might be a politician, or it might be a millionaire, or it might be someone that stands on the street and just waves every day as an old retired. Bring that person in, find out their stories. Have the children investigate the stories in their family, the grandparents. Where did they live? What did they do? Because that will inform you about the future. Create stories. I do a lot of storytelling, but we don't bring storytelling as an art form into the classroom. Find storytellers and allow them to be a part of your curriculum, because it's a wonderful art form. And oftentimes working with musicians and poets, change your structure of language, and it gives you a fluidity and a beauty that is so unique. The students this morning, for instance, just to hear a storyteller go, living in my back, birds, and that's a story, but it's elevated to an art form. So bring an artist into your room. And art, if you're talking about the 30s, there's an art movement going on that's equally stunning and thundering for the future. There's Paul Klee, there's all this Picasso. Why was that suddenly breaking loose? And what did it it told us about the future. When Picasso does Guernica, he's telling us where we're going to be. Anyway, that seems obvious. I think you also create simulations as opposed to the traditional teaching style. So if you want to teach, for instance, about apartheid, one way of doing it is say to the students, okay, you cannot use the bathrooms. And the students go, what? Well, that's apartheid. It means you're restricted to moving certain places in the school, and maybe you can't go to the most important place. That's apartheid. And then it's an introduction to what is apartheid. Or if you're teaching capitalism and you want to, okay, you have to bring something everyone brings to lunch, something to eat or to sell. Some people will be successful. They'll market their things, they'll sell, and some people will not, and that's failure. That's capitalism. You want to teach socialism? You collect money from everybody. You go out and buy some food product. You bring it back and you all eat. You might eat more, but it might not be as unique as that capitalistic lunch. Right. So the idea of finding out ways to involve feeling as well as reading. You don't read about apartheid, but you can feel it for a moment. The wave was an example of feeling, giving up your freedom. I was listening to the radio just the other day, and a student, the teacher, had done this to teach the McCarthy era, which in the United States was huge, and the teacher did this to the classroom. All right, I happen to know someone in the classroom that's cheating. I know who you are. Yes, I do. I know you're cheating. Petrified the student. Would you please come forward? You are cheating, because I have information right here that you are the cheater. This kid goes, I've never cheated, Mom. And then the student comes up to the front of the room and says, and the teacher says, that's McCarthyism.
Wow.
There was no evidence of that, but you're going to be the victim of it.
Now, I have to ask this question because when I taught the wave this year, I said, we're not going to look at the question that everybody else asks, the question about how people can follow a leader blindly. These are Jewish kids in a Jewish religious school. They all studied the Holocaust. They all know about Hitler. I want to ask another question. Do you think it was moral for the teacher to use his students as
No.
guinea pigs?
No, not at all. The teacher I made a great mistake. You never place your students at risk. Never. Never. I got caught up in my own experiment and became a victim of it. You know, I liked it. I liked the power. I liked the control. I liked the adulation. Huge mistake. Huge.
So if you had to teach that again
I would never do
and
that again.
answer that question of that student, of your students, how did 90% of the German people allow 10% to really go crazy on a killing spree, to put it widely? How would you get that message across?
I suspect bullying takes place in some cases, or separations take place in some. So the students might have an intricate knowledge of those feelings of being isolated or being accepted. And I'd try to explore that within the school context to see what groups are existing and how they're treating each other. Or I think respect comes from honesty. Respect comes because that teacher has expressed to the students their loves, their passions, their failures, their hopes, their dreams. So there's a human being there. It's not just a teacher giving an edict.
Right. That's true. I think you're right.
And then the
about
teacher
that.
has to seek out from the students that same openness and encourage it. So oftentimes you do that in journals. I mean, if you ask students to write a journal, for instance, but you're asking them to expose themselves to you in a very intimate way. So if you get a journal from a child and you read something that's frightening, or maybe a suicide or a depression, you have a responsibility now to engage that child and talk about those issues that are troubling to that child. But you're now plunging into a whole world of personal life. But that's what happens to a good teacher. It's part of the game.
Yeah, I often thought it would be, I should have taken more psychology classes and less education classes.
No, you should have taken more about who you are, the art that you love, or the things that you love, because that's what kids need. They need to be around someone that's just in love with something. That's powerful.
Do you think you've had the most influence as a teacher, as a coach, as a parent? Where do you think, as a storyteller, where do you think in your life you've had the most influence?
Oh, definitely as a family member.
Do you think that your being fired from the school system was probably one of the best things that happened to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Didn't think at the time, because all I wanted to be I just wanted to be a teacher. You know this. Being around young kids is like being around hope.
You're the second teacher that's said that. Yeah, the second
Just
person
eternal
that said
hope.
that to me this week. That being around young people is like being around hope.
I see that in the students that I've just been addressing, and I talk to the other teachers. Aren't you happy? Look, they're happy. For the most part, they are, because it's springtime.
Right.
They're with their friends. They're in school together. It's a good time, and you get to be around that.
Right. What do you feel is the biggest challenge as teachers, maybe also as parents?
Well, in that world of confusion and demands, to still find that love that you had about a topic or a subject, and you still want to explore it, and you're actively exploring it in front of the students, whether it be history or literature. You're in love with something, and that's profound, and students will feel that. But it's hard to maintain that affection because you're being distracted by so much minutia, and it destroys a lot of people.
And your students that you meet from the first year of teaching, the WAVE was your first year of teaching, right? When do they confide in you how this changed their lives?
Oh yeah, lesson plan, the documentary, they explore that. So you'll see many of the students today as adults, and they're talking. One of them, Wendy Brody, will not even join a group. Her fear of groups is so ingrained now. And she's an international chef, a successful entrepreneur, but will not join the Parent-Teacher Association.
Wow.
Another young man will not engage in financial contracts for fear of, but he's a millionaire many times over. But he uses the WAVE as a rationale for not trusting other people. Many of the students are just the opposite. Doug Warnock, one of my basketball players, is an internationally known sculptor. and he's a big man. He has all his children. He brings them over to the house, and he's a giant bear of a man who loves his art, and it shows. But he's also struggling for the janitors in his school to get fair pay. And his children and his students know that he is struggling for fairness. So many of the former students in the Wave are engaged like that. And how do you find your identity, your role in life? Well, one of them is our social responsibility to our neighbors and friends to have fairness, equality, justice. And people struggle for that. Almost all the students have found themselves in some way working for the betterment of the whole.
Then maybe that experiment was highly successful and you shouldn't have any regrets.
Or the times were. I think people ignore the fact that the times were tumultuous. A war that no one wanted, racial integration that no one knew how to deal with, and cultural change that was rabid. Kids taking drugs, music changing. So that great cauldron of confusion allowed the Wave probably to happen, but it allowed students to evaluate their own lives. What do I do if I see something profoundly wrong? Do I take up a gun? And some of my students did. Do I work nonviolently? Do I accept arrest for my beliefs? Many of them did at Oakland Induction Center and do it today. Or do I work within the system? But all throughout the Wave, those students that I know now as adults have all done that in some way.
Morton Rue.
Morton Rue is Todd Strasser.
Yes.
He wrote a novelization. I wrote the short story. Norman Lear made it into a movie for television. That movie was novelized by Morton Rue or Todd Strasser. That's what you read.
But someone told me that you said you've never read it.
I've never read it.
Now, how can that be? And
well,
why not?
because one, I lived it. I didn't have to read about it.
But
And two, as a writer, I knew that in the future I would want to do it as a play or I'd want to do it as a musical. And I didn't want the intrusion of someone else's ideas to seep into my own thinking.
Interesting.
So I knew I had to block that out and never read it.
And to this day, you haven't read it.
No, I've never read it.
And have your children read it?
No.
That's amazing to me.
But, a couple of years ago I did a musical with a Bay Area young adult theater company, and that to me was the most accurate portrayal of the Wave, because I could use music as an instrument to convey the feelings. You don't know me, you don't know me, you don't know me at all, you don't see me! You don't see me at all, you see yourself in me, you see yourself, you see... So I could use music. There is a moment in time, that comes to everyone, this moment in time. It's not expected, something is wrong. Injustice right in front of you, what will you do? This moment that is here today, will you speak out loud or pray it away? This moment, the choice you must make for silence and fear, or risk that will take you to freedom. Freedom, what will you do? So you can use music to convey what was happening in the Wave far more appropriately than dialogue. You were asking earlier about the ingredients for that teacher, and I had a couple more notes here. I think sometimes you have to travel to find life and study it. So your students might have to go to a hospital or a prison to really, if they're studying Dead Man Walking, for instance, it's a great book.
Yes.
You really want to understand it, you take your students to a prison. And Mercy High School in San Francisco, where my granddaughter went, that's what they went to death row.
Really?
But don't you think that had an impact on these kids about
sure.
who's incarcerated, why they're incarcerated, how many black men in America end up in jail, and what's how many are in solitary confinement, and how long are they in solitary confinement? So that's one way. You have to get out of the classroom. I think the other thing is to bring people into your classroom. So it's kind of like we tend to. We just need to include people, to reach out to find that prisoner to talk to us, or the crazy person, or the saint, or you just have to spend a lot of time reaching out and taking risks.
I think that's an important point.
Risk-taking?
Risk-taking.
Well, if we're talking to teachers, you don't do it alone. Right. You confide in other teachers so they know what you're doing and they can serve as commentary on you, so that you don't get caught off going someplace that's dangerous for you or your students. And that means an affinity group. That means you work hard to never be alone as a teacher. You surely convey this information to your principal and the administration so they know what's going on and they're not afraid. If something happens as a surprise to them, then they're up in arms because they think something's going on without their sensitivity. But if you involve them, you're much greater chance of having it be successful.